The wind howled through the streets, carrying a bitter cold that cut through the thin jackets of those walking home. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the cracked pavement. Olivia Carter pulled her coat tighter around her small body, her fingers numb despite the warm gloves her mother had given her that morning. She was only 8 years old, but she could feel the sharp bite of winter pressing against her skin. The city always felt different at night. The cheerful noise of the day faded, replaced by silence and distant sounds of car horns. Olivia was used to walking home from school, but tonight, the world around her felt heavier, as if something unseen lingered in the air. She clutched her lunchbox close to her chest, the sandwich inside untouched. She hadn't been hungry during lunch, and now she carried it home, thinking her mother might save it for later. Her mother always told her that food should never be wasted, but as she turned a corner near the park, her steps slowed. On a bench, half hidden beneath the dim light of a street lamp, sat a man. His clothes were worn and covered in dust. His hands were thin, his fingers curled slightly as if trying to trap whatever warmth they could find. He had a thick beard, and his hair looked messy, as if it hadn't been cut in a long time. His eyes, staring at the ground, looked tired, distant, almost empty. Olivia had seen homeless people before, but something about this man made her pause. Maybe it was the way he sat, his shoulders hunched as if carrying something heavy, or maybe it was how still he was, like the cold had frozen him in place. She looked at the sandwich in her hand. It wasn't much, just peanut butter and jelly between two slices of bread. But she remembered what her mother always said: if you have more than you need, you should share. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward him. Her boots crunched softly against the icy pavement. The man didn't move. He didn't even look up. She stopped in front of him and held out the sandwich. Here. For a moment, there was no reaction. The man's head remained down, his breath coming out in faint clouds. Then, slowly, he lifted his face. His eyes, a faded blue, locked onto hers. They weren't scary eyes. They were sad. Deep, heavy sadness, like someone who had been lost for a very long time. His gaze flickered to the sandwich, then back to her. Why? His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in a while. Olivia shrugged, feeling a little nervous now that he was looking at her. You look hungry. The man hesitated. His hands twitched, like he wanted to take it but wasn't sure if he should. Olivia didn't move, her small fingers still holding the sandwich out. After a long pause, he slowly reached out. His fingers were shaking as they touched the plastic wrap. It was clear he was cold. Very cold. As he took the sandwich, something changed in his eyes. The sadness was still there, but now there was something else, something Olivia didn't quite understand. He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the sandwich tightly, as if afraid it might disappear. You don't know what you just did, he whispered. Olivia frowned. I just gave you food. The man looked down at the sandwich, his fingers tracing the edges of the plastic. No, he murmured. You gave me more than that. She didn't understand what he meant, but something about his voice made her chest feel tight. The wind blew harder, making her shiver. She took a step back. I have to go home. The man nodded slowly, his eyes still on the sandwich. Thank you. She offered a small smile before turning around and walking away. But even as she hurried toward home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. And she had no idea how much that small moment would change everything. The house was warm, filled with the comforting scent of dinner cooking on the stove. The soft hum of the heater filled the quiet evening, mixing with the faint sound of Olivia's pencil scratching against her notebook. She sat at the kitchen table, her small fingers wrapped around her pencil as she carefully wrote her spelling words. Her mother, Lisa Carter, stood by the stove, stirring a pot of soup. It was a normal evening, peaceful and quiet, just like any other. Then came the knock. It was loud and firm, echoing through the small house. Olivia jumped, her pencil slipping from her hand and rolling across the table. Lisa frowned, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. It was late for visitors. Who could that be? She muttered, glancing at the clock. The knock came again, harder this time. Lisa hesitated for only a moment before walking to the door. Olivia watched as her mother peered through the small peephole. Lisa's shoulders stiffened. Slowly, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. Two police officers stood outside, their dark uniforms standing out against the dim light of the porch. Their faces were serious. The cold night air rushed into the house, making Olivia shiver from her seat. Lisa tightened her grip on the doorknob. "Can I help you, officers?" Her voice was calm, but Olivia could hear the worry underneath. The taller officer, a man with sharp eyes, gave a small nod. "Mrs. Carter, we need to speak with you and your daughter." Lisa's eyebrows pulled together. She instinctively turned her head toward Olivia, who was now gripping the edge of the table. Her stomach twisted. "Is something wrong?" Lisa asked. The second officer, a woman with kind eyes, glanced past Lisa and spotted Olivia. She gave a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's about something that happened yesterday." Lisa stepped aside, letting the officers into the house. The moment they entered, the warm air wrapped around them, but their expressions remained serious. Lisa led them to the living room, her movements careful. Olivia slowly got up from the table, her feet feeling heavy as she followed. The officers sat down on the couch. Lisa took the chair across from them, and Olivia quietly sat beside her mother. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The taller officer spoke first. "Your daughter gave food to a homeless man yesterday. Is that correct?" Lisa's eyes widened slightly. She turned to Olivia. "You told me about that, sweetheart. The man in the park." Olivia nodded slowly, her hands gripping the hem of her sweater. "Yes," she whispered. The officers exchanged glances. The woman officer leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. "That man wasn't just any homeless person. His name is David Thompson." Lisa frowned. "Okay. And why are you here about him?" The male officer took a deep breath. "Because David Thompson was reported missing 15 years ago." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Lisa blinked. Olivia felt her heart beat faster. "Missing?" Lisa repeated, shaking her head slightly. "I don't understand." The officer nodded. 15 years ago, David Thompson disappeared. His family searched for him, but he was never found. Until now. Lisa's face paled. "And my daughter, she just happened to find him." The female officer gave a small nod. "It seems that way. He walked into a police station last night. He told the officers that a little girl had given him food, and that kindness made him realize he couldn't keep running from his past." Olivia's fingers curled into her sweater. She didn't know what to say. Lisa looked down at her daughter, searching her face. "Sweetheart, do you remember anything strange about him?" Olivia thought back to the way the man had looked at her, the sadness in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he took the sandwich. She remembered his whisper, "You don't know what you just did." Slowly, she nodded. He seemed sad. The officers exchanged another glance. The male officer cleared his throat. "David Thompson has a very complicated story. And now that he has come forward, there are people who will want to talk to him. His family, the police, maybe even the people from his past." Lisa's jaw tightened. "Are you saying my daughter is in some kind of danger?" The female officer shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. If anything, your daughter helped him. She reminded him that he's still human, that people still care. He told us that if she hadn't given him that sandwich, he might never have had the courage to step forward." Olivia's eyes widened. She had only wanted to give him food. She hadn't thought it would change anything. Lisa let out a slow breath, pressing a hand to her chest. "So, what happens now?" The male officer leaned forward. "David has asked to see Olivia. He wants to thank her properly." Lisa hesitated. She looked down at Olivia. "Sweetheart, do you want to see him?" Olivia bit her lip. The idea of seeing the man again made her nervous, but not in a bad way. It was more like curiosity. She wanted to know more. She wanted to understand. Slowly, she nodded. Lisa looked back at the officers. "Where is he now?" "He's at the station," the male officer replied. "We can take you there whenever you're ready." Lisa let out a slow breath, then stood up. "Give us a few minutes." The officers nodded, standing as well. Olivia followed her mother into the hallway. Lisa knelt in front of her, brushing her daughter's curls back gently. "Are you sure about this?" Olivia nodded again. I want to know why he was missing." Lisa studied her daughter's face for a long moment before nodding. "Okay." They grabbed their coats, and a few minutes later, Olivia and her mother followed the officers outside into the cold night. As they got into the police car, Olivia stared out the window, her heart pounding. She had no idea what she was about to discover. The car ride to the police station was quiet. The city lights passed by in a blur, casting shadows on Olivia's face as she stared out the window. Her small hands were folded in her lap, her fingers curled tightly together. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. Nervous, curious, maybe even a little scared. Lisa sat beside her, glancing down at her daughter every few minutes. She wanted to ask if Olivia was okay, but she didn't want to overwhelm her. Instead, she reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Olivia looked up and managed a small smile. The car pulled into the parking lot of the police station. The officers led them inside, past the front desk and down a long hallway. The walls were gray, the lights bright but cold. Olivia's stomach twisted as she followed behind her mother, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. They stopped outside a small room with a glass window. Olivia peeked inside. The man was sitting at a table, his hands resting on the surface. He looked different from the last time she had seen him. He was cleaner now, wearing a fresh shirt and jacket. His beard had been trimmed, and his messy hair was combed back. But his eyes were the same, tired, distant, full of something Olivia still didn't understand. The female officer bent down to Olivia's level. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Olivia hesitated, then nodded. Lisa placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder as the officer opened the door. The man looked up as they stepped inside. His blue eyes landed on Olivia, and something in them softened. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he smiled, just a little. "I was hoping I'd get to see you again." Olivia shifted on her feet. "Hi," she said quietly. Lisa pulled out a chair and motioned for Olivia to sit. She took the seat across from the man, her mother standing beside her. The man studied her for a moment before speaking. "Do you know my name?" Olivia shook her head. He let out a small chuckle, but there was no real humor in it. "I guess I don't really have one anymore. For years, I was just another face on the street. People passed by me every day and never asked who I was. They never even looked at me." Olivia frowned. "That's sad." The man nodded slowly. "It is, but that's how the world works sometimes." He leaned forward slightly. "But you looked at me. You saw me." Olivia felt her cheeks grow warm. She hadn't done anything special. She had just given him a sandwich. Lisa cleared her throat, breaking the silence. "The officers told us your name is David Thompson," she said, "and that you were missing for 15 years. David's expression changed. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled slightly on the table. "I wasn't just missing," he said quietly. "I was hiding." Olivia tilted her head. "Why?" David exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. It looked like he was struggling to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. "Because I was afraid." Lisa exchanged a glance with the officer standing near the door. "Afraid of what?" David's fingers tapped against the table. "Of the people who wanted me gone." Olivia's eyes widened. Lisa's grip on her shoulder tightened slightly. David sighed. 15 years ago, I had a normal life. I had a family, a good job. I worked for a company that I thought was honest. but I found out that wasn't true. Lisa's brows furrowed. What do you mean? David leaned back in his chair. I discovered something I wasn't supposed to. Something illegal. And when I tried to report it, everything fell apart. The room felt colder now, the air heavier. They threatened me, David continued. Told me to keep quiet. But I refused. He swallowed hard. And then, one night, my house caught fire. Lisa gasped softly. Olivia's stomach twisted. My wife and my son were inside. David whispered, his voice barely audible. I tried to save them, but I couldn't. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the lights above them. Lisa placed a hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with shock. Olivia felt something heavy settle in her chest. David took a deep breath, blinking hard. After that, I ran. I had no proof, no way to fight back. And the people responsible, they were powerful. If I stayed, they would have made sure I disappeared for good. Lisa shook her head slowly. So you've been living on the streets ever since? David nodded. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't trust anyone. I barely even spoke to people. I just existed. He looked at Olivia again. Until this little girl reminded me that I was still human. Olivia felt her throat tighten. She had only given him food. She hadn't thought it would mean so much. Lisa took a deep breath, trying to process everything. So now what? She asked. Are the police going to do something? The officer standing near the door stepped forward. We've reopened the case, she said. David's story matches records from the past. His wife and son's deaths were ruled an accident at the time. But with this new information, we have reason to believe that wasn't the truth. David gave a hollow laugh. 15 years too late. Lisa shook her head. It's not too late. She looked at the officer. If you can prove what happened, can you find the people responsible? The officer nodded. That's the goal. David let out a shaky breath. I never thought I'd see this day. He turned back to Olivia. And it's all because of you. Olivia blinked. But I only gave you a sandwich. David smiled, but his eyes were sad. Sometimes the smallest kindness can change everything. Lisa wiped at her eyes before placing a gentle hand on Olivia's back. I think we should go home now, she said softly. David nodded. Thank you for coming. He looked at Olivia again. And thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Olivia smiled shyly. You're welcome. As she and her mother stood to leave, Olivia looked back one last time. David sat there, watching them go, a new light in his tired eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't invisible anymore. The night air was cold as Olivia and her mother stepped out of the police station. The sky was dark, but the city lights flickered around them, casting long shadows on the pavement. Olivia shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her small frame. Lisa noticed and wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close as they walked toward the car. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Olivia kept thinking about David Thompson, about the pain in his eyes when he talked about his past. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to something so big. Lisa started the car, but before driving off, she turned to her daughter. Are you okay, sweetheart? Olivia nodded slowly. I just keep thinking about him. Lisa sighed. Me too. As they drove home, Olivia stared out the window, her mind filled with questions. If David had been hiding for 15 years, what had made him come forward now? Was it really just the sandwich she gave him? Or was there something more? The house was warm and quiet when they arrived. Olivia changed into her pajamas and climbed into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. She kept replaying David's words in her mind. The people who wanted me gone. She tossed and turned before finally drifting into a restless sleep. Morning came too soon. The sun peeked through the curtains, and Olivia rubbed her eyes as she sat up. Her mother was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The news was playing on the small TV near the counter. Olivia yawned as she walked over. Good morning. Lisa gave her a small smile. "Morning, sweetheart." As Olivia sat down, her eyes landed on the news report. A photo of David Thompson flashed across the screen, along with a headline: "Man missing for 15 years comes forward. Investigation reopened." Olivia's breath caught. She leaned in, listening carefully. The reporter's voice was calm but serious. David Thompson, who was presumed dead after the tragic fire that took the lives of his wife and son, has surfaced after 15 years. Authorities are now looking into the events leading up to his disappearance. Lisa turned the volume down and sighed. "It's all over the news now." Olivia bit her lip. "Do you think the bad people he talked about will see this?" Lisa frowned, her grip tightening around her coffee cup. "I don't know, sweetheart. But if they do, I just hope the police are ready." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. The day passed slowly. Olivia went to school, but she couldn't focus. The teachers' voices faded into the background as her mind wandered. She wondered if David was safe. She wondered if the people who had hurt him all those years ago were watching. When she got home, her mother was on the phone. Lisa's face was tense, her free hand gripping the edge of the counter. "Yes, I understand," she said, her voice low. "Thank you for letting me know." She hung up and turned to Olivia, her expression serious. "That was Officer Taylor," she said. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "Is David okay?" Lisa nodded. "He's safe, but he remembered something. Something important." Olivia's eyes widened. "What is it?" Lisa hesitated. "He says he has proof. He says he kept a secret all these years that could finally bring those people to justice." Olivia's breath caught. "What secret?" Lisa sighed. "I don't know, but the police are going to see him again tonight, and they want me to come too." Olivia sat up straighter. "Can I come?" Lisa hesitated, then shook her head. "Not this time, sweetheart. It might not be safe." Olivia opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the worry in her mother's eyes. "Okay," she said softly. That evening, Lisa left for the police station, leaving Olivia with their neighbor. The house felt quiet without her mother. Olivia sat on the couch, staring at the news playing on the TV. The reporters kept talking about David Thompson, about his disappearance, about the fire. She curled her knees to her chest, wondering what secret David had been keeping. Hours passed, and Olivia finally fell asleep on the couch. She woke up to the sound of the front door unlocking. Lisa stepped inside, looking tired but relieved. Olivia sat up quickly. "What happened?" she asked. Lisa sat down beside her and let out a long breath. David had something hidden all these years, something no one knew about. Olivia's eyes widened. What was it? Lisa leaned forward. Before he disappeared, David knew the company he worked for was doing something illegal. He found documents, papers that proved everything. But when the threats started, he knew he had to run. So he hid them. Olivia's heart pounded. "Where?" Lisa smiled slightly. "Inside a small wooden box. He buried it in a park before he disappeared." Olivia gasped. "And it's still there?" Lisa nodded. "He never went back for it. He was too scared. But now, he's finally ready." Olivia felt excitement and fear rush through her. "So if the police find it, will those bad people go to jail?" Lisa nodded again. "If the documents are still there, and if they show what David remembers, then yes, this could change everything." Olivia swallowed. "Are they going to get the box?" Lisa hesitated. Tomorrow morning. They didn't want to go at night in case someone was watching. A shiver ran down Olivia's spine. What if the bad people already know? Lisa's face darkened. "That's what I'm afraid of." That night, Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with thoughts of David, of the buried box, of the people who had ruined his life. Tomorrow would be an important day, and Olivia had a feeling it wouldn't be an easy one. The morning felt different. The air was heavy, filled with something Olivia couldn't quite describe. It wasn't just the usual quiet of a new day. It was the kind of silence that made everything feel more serious, more real. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring her cereal without eating it. Her mother sat across from her, drinking coffee, lost in thought. Neither of them spoke. The TV was on in the background, but Olivia wasn't paying attention. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere buried beneath the cold earth, hidden inside a wooden box that held secrets from the past. Lisa sighed and set her coffee cup down. "The police will be going to the park soon," she said. Olivia looked up. "Is David going with them?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, he wants to be there." Olivia hesitated. "Is it safe?" Lisa gave her a small, reassuring smile. "There will be officers with him. No one can hurt him now." But Olivia wasn't sure if that was true. Her mind went back to what David had said about the people who had tried to silence him, the ones who had destroyed his life. If they had been willing to do something so terrible all those years ago, would they really stop now? She pushed her bowl away, no longer hungry. Lisa checked her phone. "I need to go meet them soon," she said. "Are you going to be okay here?" Olivia didn't want to stay behind, but she knew she had no choice. "Yeah," she muttered. Lisa reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay." Olivia nodded, but she wasn't sure she believed it. Hours passed, and Olivia waited. She sat on the couch, her eyes glued to the clock, watching the minutes tick by. Every second felt like forever. She tried to distract herself, watched TV, read a book, played with her cat, but nothing worked. Then, finally, the phone rang. She jumped up and grabbed it. "Mom." Lisa's voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something tense. "It's done. We found the box." Olivia's heart raced. And was everything inside? Lisa hesitated for a moment. Yes. Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So, what happens now?" "The police are going through the documents," Lisa said. "If they have enough proof, they can finally arrest the people who did this." Olivia felt a small spark of hope. David must be happy. Lisa was quiet for a moment. "He's relieved. But there's something else." Olivia's grip on the phone tightened. "What?" Lisa exhaled. "The documents mention names, important names, and one of them is someone still in power today." Olivia frowned. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated. "I mean, this isn't just about an old crime anymore. This is about people who still have power, people who might do anything to keep their secrets hidden." Olivia's stomach twisted. For the first time since this all started, she realized something. David had spent 15 years hiding because he was afraid. Now that the truth was out, he might still be in danger. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. If the police had proof, why hadn't they arrested anyone yet? Why did her mother sound so worried? And most of all, was David really safe? She got out of bed and tiptoed to the living room, careful not to wake her mother. The TV remote sat on the couch, and she picked it up, turning the volume down low before switching to the news. Her heart pounded as she watched. At first, there was nothing. Just the usual reports. Weather, traffic, a story about a lost dog. But then, she saw it. A reporter stood outside the police station, her face serious. Behind her, officers moved in and out of the building. There was tension in the air. Authorities have reopened a 15-year-old case following the sudden appearance of David Thompson, a man who was presumed dead after a tragic fire took the lives of his wife and son. New evidence has come to light, allegedly connecting powerful individuals to a cover-up. While officials have yet to confirm the details, sources suggest that arrests could be made soon. However, there are concerns about potential threats against those involved in the case. Olivia's breath caught. Threats. Her hands tightened around the remote. The screen shifted, and a video appeared. It was grainy, taken from a security camera. She leaned forward. A figure in a dark hood stood near the police station, watching. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked away. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. She jumped up and ran to her mother's room. "Mom." Lisa stirred and sat up, blinking. "What is it?" Olivia pointed at the TV. "Someone's watching the police station. What if they're after David?" Lisa's eyes widened as she looked at the screen. Then her phone rang. She grabbed it quickly. "Hello?" Olivia watched as her mother's face changed, her expression going from tired to alarmed. "When?" Lisa asked. A pause. "Is he safe?" Another pause. Then, Lisa closed her eyes and exhaled. "Okay, we'll be right there." She hung up and turned to Olivia, her face pale. "David is missing." Olivia's stomach dropped. "What?" Lisa was already getting out of bed, grabbing her jacket. "He left the police station earlier tonight. They were keeping him in protective custody, but he said he needed fresh air. He never came back." Olivia's heart pounded. "Do they think someone took him?" Lisa hesitated. "They don't know yet, but they're looking for him." Olivia felt fear rise inside her. David had spent 15 years hiding from danger. And now, the danger had found him again. The night felt colder than usual. Olivia sat in the car beside her mother, gripping her hands together to stop them from shaking. The headlights from passing cars flashed across her face, but she barely noticed. Her mind was stuck on one thing. David was missing. Lisa's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she drove through the quiet streets. The police had told her to stay home, but she refused. She couldn't just sit and wait, not when the man who had suffered for 15 years was in danger again. Olivia turned to her mother. "Where do you think he went?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't know. But if he was scared, he might have gone somewhere familiar. Somewhere he felt safe." Olivia thought hard. David had lived in fear for so long. He had no home, no family left. Where would he go? Then, suddenly, she knew. "The alley," she whispered. Lisa glanced at her. "What?" Olivia sat up straight. "The place where I found him. The first night. He had been sitting there like it was the only place he could rest." Lisa hesitated for only a second before turning the car in the opposite direction. She pressed the gas pedal harder, her knuckles turning white on the wheel. They reached the alley a few minutes later. The street was dark and empty, except for the dim glow of a single street lamp. Olivia felt her heartbeat in her ears as she and her mother stepped out of the car. Lisa called out, her voice firm but careful. "David." Silence. Olivia's breath caught. What if they were too late? Then, from the shadows, came a weak cough. Olivia turned toward the sound. Near the dumpster, in the same place where she had first seen him, sat David. His back was against the brick wall, his head hanging low. His clothes were torn, and there was a cut on his forehead. "David." Olivia ran to him. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment, he looked confused. Then recognition crossed his face, and he tried to sit up. Lisa was beside them in an instant, helping him. "What happened?" she asked. "Who did this to you?" David winced but shook his head. "No one. No one hurt me. I ran." Olivia frowned. "Why?" David looked at her, his eyes filled with something between fear and guilt. "Because I knew they would come for me." Lisa's face tightened. "David, we found the documents. The police have proof now. These people, whoever they are, won't get away with it." David sighed. "You don't understand. These aren't just ordinary criminals. They have power, connections. The police might have proof, but proof doesn't always mean justice." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. "Then what do we do?" David looked at them, his face pale but determined. "We finish this." The police station was tense when they arrived. Officers were moving quickly, talking in hushed voices. It was clear that something big was happening. Lisa and Olivia led David inside, and immediately, Officer Taylor rushed toward them. Relief flashed across his face. "Thank God," he said. "We've been looking everywhere for you." David nodded. "I'm ready to give my full statement." The officer nodded back. "Good, but we need to move fast." Lisa frowned. "Why?" Officer Taylor lowered his voice. "Because someone tried to destroy the documents." Olivia gasped. "What?" Taylor nodded grimly. "After you left, someone broke into the evidence room. They didn't find the box because we moved it, but they set fire to the storage area. It's clear that whoever we're dealing with knows we're close." David clenched his fists. "They won't stop." Taylor looked him in the eye. "Then we won't either." They led David to a private room, where he gave his full statement. He talked about the company he once worked for, how he discovered illegal activities, how he had gathered proof, and how, when he tried to report it, his house had been burned down with his family inside. His voice shook when he spoke of his wife and son, but he didn't stop. Olivia listened, tears in her eyes. She couldn't imagine the pain he had carried all these years. Finally, when everything was recorded, Taylor stood up. "We're going to make arrests tonight," he said. "But there's something else." Lisa frowned. "What?" Taylor exhaled. "The man behind this. He's not just a businessman. He's someone in the government. A high-ranking official. That's why this case was buried for so long." David nodded. "I knew it. That's why I ran." Taylor's expression was serious. "We need to be careful, but I promise you, we're going to take them down." The night was far from over. As Olivia and her mother sat in the waiting area, they could hear police officers giving orders, making calls. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on them. Then suddenly, the doors burst open. A man in a dark suit walked in, flanked by two officers. His face was hard, his eyes cold. Olivia didn't know who he was, but she could feel the tension in the room. David stepped forward, his hands clenched at his sides. "You," he said quietly. The man smirked. "Long time no see, David." Lisa stiffened. "Is that him?" she whispered. David nodded. "That's the man who ordered my family's death." Officer Taylor stepped between them. "Robert Callahan," he said. "You're under arrest." The man's smirk didn't fade. "You think this is over?" he said. Taylor ignored him as the officers placed handcuffs on his wrists. "We have all the proof we need." Callahan's smile finally faded. "You have no idea what you've started." Taylor didn't respond. He just nodded to the officers, who led Callahan away. As the doors closed behind him, David let out a long breath. It was over. After 15 years, the truth was finally out. David turned to Olivia. His eyes were filled with something she hadn't seen before. "Peace." "Thank you," he said softly. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. "I just gave you a sandwich," she whispered. David smiled. "No, you gave me a reason to stop running." Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. "You're free now, David." David nodded. He was. For the first time in 15 years, he was free. The morning light spread softly through the living room window, casting warm patterns on the floor. Olivia sat on the couch, staring at her hands, still trying to believe that everything was finally over. It had only been a few hours since the police took Robert Callahan away, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. The world outside seemed normal. Cars driving by, people walking their dogs. But Olivia knew that, for David, life would never be the same again. Lisa walked into the room, holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one in front of Olivia and sat beside her. "You didn't sleep, did you?" Olivia shook her head. "I tried, but my mind wouldn't stop." Lisa sighed. "I know. It's been a lot." For a moment, they sat in silence, both lost in their thoughts. Then, a soft knock at the door made Olivia sit up straight. Her heart pounded. Even though she knew the danger was gone, a part of her still felt afraid. Lisa placed a hand on her arm. "It's okay." Taking a deep breath, Olivia stood up and walked to the door. When she opened it, she saw David standing there. He looked different. His face, which had once been full of fear, now carried something else. Peace. He was still wearing the same old jacket, but he stood taller, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "David," Olivia whispered. He smiled, a real smile this time. "May I come in?" She stepped aside quickly. Of course. Lisa joined them in the living room, offering David a seat. He sat down, his hands resting on his knees. There was a quiet moment before he finally spoke. "It's strange," he said softly. "For 15 years, I dreamed of this moment. The day when the truth would come out, when I wouldn't have to run anymore. But now that it's here, I don't know what to do." Lisa leaned forward. "You can start over, David. You can have a life again." He nodded slowly. "I know, but it's hard to imagine." He looked at Olivia. "I spent so many years surviving. I forgot what it's like to just live." Olivia swallowed the lump in her throat. "Maybe you don't have to figure it all out right away." David chuckled. "Maybe not." He looked around the house, taking in the warmth, the comfort. "I forgot what it feels like to be in home." Lisa's voice was gentle. "You don't have to be alone anymore." David met her eyes, and for a moment, he looked like he might cry. But instead, he smiled. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. The news covered the arrests, calling it one of the biggest corruption scandals in years. More people were taken into custody, and as the investigation continued, the full truth came out. David was no longer a man hiding in the shadows. He was a key witness in the case, and the world now knew his name. People called him brave, a survivor, a man who refused to be silenced. But to Olivia, he was still the man she had met in the alley, the man who had once been so lost that he didn't believe he deserved kindness. Now he was learning how to live again. One day, as Olivia walked home from school, she saw David sitting on a park bench. He was watching the children play, a soft smile on his face. She walked over and sat beside him. "You look different," she said. David chuckled. "Do I?" She nodded. "You look lighter." He exhaled. "That's because I finally let go of the past." Olivia tilted her head. "How?" David was quiet for a moment before he spoke. "For so long, I thought my life ended the day I lost my family. I believed I had nothing left. But you showed me something I had forgotten." She frowned. "What?" He looked at her, his eyes kind. "That even in the darkest moments, there is still kindness, still hope." Olivia felt warmth spread through her chest. David turned back to the playground. "I think I want to help people," he said suddenly. Olivia blinked. "Help how?" He smiled. "There are others like me. People who are lost, afraid. People who need someone to remind them that they're not alone." Olivia's heart swelled with pride. "You'd be really good at that." David chuckled. "Maybe." They sat in silence, watching the world around them. The sun was shining, the wind was gentle, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt full of possibilities.